Welcome to the Simple Mind Space podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive into today's topic, negative pressures and the pursuit of happiness. Today's episode isn't about bragging or boasting. Instead, I'm taking this opportunity to answer a question I get a lot from young listeners. They want to know the secrets to my success. I'll begin by sharing a conversation with a young person who asked me, "When you were my age, how did you deal with internal pressure?" He went on to say, "Sometimes I feel pressured by expectations I set for myself. For example, I want to reach a certain level of success by a specific age, or I want to earn a certain amount of money by a certain time. And these expectations make me feel disappointed when I don't achieve them. I've heard you say to only set expectations for yourself and not others. But when I set high expectations for myself, it causes a lot of pressure." After unpacking the surface level issues, I told him the root cause of his pressure stemmed from comparison. Now, let's unpack this idea a little further. In my experience, people fall into two categories. The first group tends to make excuses for themselves. For example, they're late because of traffic. They didn't finish their work because they weren't given specific instructions. Or they failed because society didn't provide them with a good environment to thrive. Basically, this group never accepts responsibility. It's always someone else's fault, other people, or external forces. They see themselves as the victim. Honestly, I don't pay much attention to this group. If they were my employees, I'd fire them. If they were people in my life, I'd limit my contact with them. The second group holds themselves to a higher standard. They have many goals and expectations for themselves, and when faced with setbacks, they look inward for solutions. This is the group I'm most interested in because they have a strong foundation. It's just that they don't know how to manage and control their expectations, so they spiral into negative pressure. Now let's discuss the differences between negative and positive pressure. Pressure isn't inherently bad. In reasonable amounts, it can actually motivate us to achieve our goals. I put pressure on myself to improve every day, just like I did when I was younger. But the difference is, I've learned how to manage that pressure to keep it at a healthy level, so it propels me forward. Pressure only turns negative when we can't control it, when it becomes overwhelming and harmful to our mental well-being. This can lead to self-doubt, a loss of self-confidence, and a negative self-image. So, where does negative pressure come from? I believe it comes from expectations. And the problem with expectations is they can come from two sources, external and internal. Let's start with the first source, external expectations. They're usually imposed by parents, teachers, society, or some combination of the three. Parents may expect their kids to grow up to be engineers, doctors, or CEOs, and when they don't, those expectations can weigh heavily on them. That's just one example. There are also more subtle societal expectations that contribute to this type of pressure. Society glorifies entrepreneurs who drive luxury cars, wear expensive clothes, and generally project an image of wealth. These ideals inadvertently pressure people who live more modest lifestyles, leading them to feel inferior or unsuccessful, even when they're content with their lives. In the conversation I shared earlier, it wasn't the young person's parents who pressured him. It was the pressure of comparing himself to financially free individuals like Mark, my assistant, whom I've mentioned in previous podcasts. He saw that they'd achieved financial freedom and expected himself to do the same. But because he wasn't there yet, he felt pressured and insecure. These are examples of externally imposed pressure that can come from parents, society, or comparison to others. However, these are fairly obvious examples. Now, let's look at something more insidious, comparison to an ideal. This type of pressure is subtler. It comes from societal norms and standards, and it's particularly prevalent today, especially among young people. The media is constantly highlighting those who seem to have it all. Billionaires, politicians, celebrities who drive expensive cars, live in luxury, and wear designer clothes. It paints a picture of success that's materialistic and focused on external validation. When we see this version of success everywhere, it's easy to start comparing ourselves and feeling as though we don't measure up. This is particularly harmful for those who are less secure in their sense of self. The more we absorb these messages without question, the more we begin to see them as truth, as the only way to live a successful life. This leads to negative pressure, self-doubt, and a loss of faith in ourselves. These external pressures cause us to forget the true essence of success, which is happiness and fulfillment. All the money, material possessions, and status in the world mean nothing if you aren't happy. As I've discussed in previous episodes, true success is about finding happiness and fulfillment. We can use material possessions as tools to achieve those things, but ultimately, they are simply a means to an end, not the end itself. Having a car is great, but if you don't know how to drive it to a place that makes you happy, you and the car will be stuck in the same place. So how do we avoid the trap of comparison? The solution can be summed up in 2 words: focus inward. I'll explain what I mean by this through a few examples. First, let's go back to my recent experience with YouTube. When you upload content to YouTube, you can access your data in a section called YouTube Studio. This is where you can track how your videos are performing. You can see things like watch time, likes, and dislikes, and compare them to past videos. I really like this feature because it helps me practice one of my core life principles, to simply focus on being a little better today than I was yesterday. I don't care about what other YouTubers are doing or how many subscribers or views they have. I only care about improving my own content and delivering value to my listeners. In this particular case, I don't care how many views other podcasts get, how good their sound effects are, or how much money they're making. I'm only focused on ensuring my next podcast is just a little bit better than the last, and that my message is resonating with listeners. I wasn't always this way. When I first started out, I was guilty of comparing myself to others, but I eventually realized this was a waste of time and energy. It prevented me from being creative and finding my own voice. I've since devoted all my free time to focusing on my own work and goals, researching how to deliver my message in the best way possible for my audience. This approach is what led me to develop a unique podcast. It's not just an audio podcast, it's also a video podcast, but it's not overly flashy. It has simple background music that loops over and over. Some people may be surprised by this approach, given that we live in a world that prioritizes bold visuals and flashy production. Even the music for my podcast is incredibly simple. The same track just plays on a loop. But despite its simplicity, it has allowed me to deliver my message effectively and connect with listeners. This approach has allowed me to achieve a level of success that's beyond what I initially imagined. It wasn't about trying to outdo anyone else or get the most views. It was simply about getting a little better with each episode. The same philosophy applies to life in general. Don't get caught up in comparing yourself to others or worrying about who is ahead or behind in life. Simply focus on doing your best and improving every day. It may not seem like you're making progress, but over time, you'll look up and be amazed at how far you've come. What's more important than reaching your destination is enjoying the journey. Many people confuse the means with the end. They chase money, status, and material possessions, only to find that once they reach their goal, they're still unhappy. They forgot to enjoy the ride. That's why I love the concept of focus inward. It's about focusing on your own personal growth and striving to be better than you were yesterday, regardless of what's happening around you. It's a simple, yet incredibly powerful philosophy, and it can be applied to everything from something as small as creating a podcast to reaching greater goals, such as financial freedom. Many listeners may be surprised to learn that I don't focus on analyzing the competition. I don't pay attention to what other YouTubers are doing or how successful they are. I'm not even aware of what other financial podcasts are out there or what content they're producing, because I've never taken the time to research it. Instead, I spend all my free time researching how to best deliver valuable information to my listeners. How long should each episode be? What kind of background music should I use? How can I ensure my listeners stay engaged? I'm totally focused on my own process and how I can improve it. My podcast is unique. It's not a traditional audio podcast, nor is it a video podcast with fancy special effects. In fact, the background music is just one simple loop. This unconventional approach may seem strange, but it's incredibly effective. Several professional YouTubers have told me they're surprised by how well my podcast has performed, despite being in a niche category like education and finance. This isn't something I like to brag about. I'm simply sharing this as an example to prove my point. Focus Inward works. In just 7 months, by simply focusing on getting a little better with each episode, we managed to reach 100,000 YouTube subscribers. That's a pretty remarkable result, especially in such a niche category. It's proof that with consistent effort and a focus on self-improvement, you can achieve great things, even if it seems like you're moving slowly. This principle applies to life in general. Don't compare yourself to others or worry about what they're doing. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses or feel pressured to achieve a certain status. Focus on setting your own goals and striving to be a little better each day, whether that means improving your running time, learning a new skill, or building a successful business. Focusing inward is my secret weapon. It's how I've been able to stay motivated and achieve financial freedom. In a corporate setting, people may be surprised that I don't recommend competitive analysis, but I stand by this philosophy. Of course, it's important to be aware of your competitors, but you should never focus on them more than your own organization. Only 1% of our energy should go toward figuring out what the competition is doing. The other 99% should be focused on how we can improve our organization, products, and customer experience. I used this approach when I was in management, even though it initially surprised many of my colleagues. In the corporate world, it's standard practice to analyze the competition. Some companies even have special departments dedicated to this process. I've always been against this. At first, people were skeptical, but over time, the results spoke for themselves. Our company outpaced the competition because we focused on making ourselves better, rather than trying to outdo others. Here's a little secret that few people realize. This is exactly what your competitors fear most, to see you diligently working hard to improve every day. Take my podcast, for example. I'm not afraid of what other podcasters are doing, how much money they have, or how many subscribers they have. My only fear is someone else consistently producing better content that delivers more value to my audience. The same is true in business. It's not about your competitor's capital, the number of employees, or their marketing strategy. What they fear most is seeing your organization consistently improve day after day. But there's one final point I want to make. The best part of focusing inward is it builds confidence. There's a quote I really like. I'll put it up on the screen. Confidence isn't walking into a room thinking you're better than everyone else. It's walking in, not having to compare yourself to anyone at all. When you stop comparing yourself to others, you're no longer seeking external validation. You're no longer worried about measuring up to an impossible standard. Instead, you focus on your own progress, and that's incredibly empowering. It creates self-confidence and leads to greater success and happiness. To illustrate this point, let's go back to the running example I mentioned earlier. People who enjoy running know that the joy is in the process, in feeling themselves get stronger with each run. They're not focused on winning or comparing themselves to other runners. They simply enjoy the feeling of getting a little better each day. Many people mistakenly approach life like a sprint, trying to beat everyone else to the finish line. But the journey of life is more like a marathon. It's about pacing yourself, enjoying the scenery, and feeling a sense of accomplishment with each mile marker. When you stop comparing yourself to others and focus on your own journey, you start to appreciate every step of the process, regardless of how fast or slow you're moving. It doesn't matter if other people are richer or more successful than you, because you're not competing with them. You're only competing with yourself, and that's a race you can always win. This is the philosophy I live by, and it's brought me a great deal of happiness and fulfillment. I don't focus on what others are doing or how they're performing. My only focus is to be better today than I was yesterday. I find joy in seeing my own progress, regardless of external markers of success. I believe many people mistakenly approach work and life like a competitive sprint, always trying to outdo those around them. They're so focused on being better than everyone else that they forget to enjoy the process. I think life is more like a marathon, and the greatest joy comes from seeing yourself improve over time, from finding happiness in the journey, rather than obsessing over the finish line. So what is my secret to success? It can be summed up in 2 words: focus inward. Don't compare yourself to others. Focus on your own growth. Don't chase external validation. Find joy in your own progress. Every day, strive to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. whether that means improving your health, your relationships, or your career. I hope my reflections have been helpful. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful evening with your loved ones. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider liking it, subscribing to my channel, and sharing it with your friends and family. That will help more people discover the podcast, which I would really appreciate.